Before World War II, and for a number of years after that, many congregations didn't have a kingdom hall of their own, and they were actually encouraged to meet in private homes or in rented facilities. The thinking was that if you were in a rented facility or a private home, you had more flexibility. You could move the meeting place from one place to the other very easily. But there were problems, there were drawbacks. Sometimes the space would be shared with other organizations. So you couldn't leave your literature, magazines, speaker stand, and maybe even a sound system in the hall at the end of the meeting. When the meeting was over, you'd have to pack it all up and take it away. But that's not all. Sometimes you had to arrive very early and clean the place up after a particularly rowdy group of people had used it. And if there were cigar smokers in that group, you were in trouble. It was very difficult to air the place out in time for the meeting. Now remember, in those days, people could smoke in a private hall. And you could smoke in an airplane. They could smoke almost anywhere. So this was a real problem for us. There were other problems. Before we had a Kingdom Hall in my hometown, the congregation met in a rented facility. Now in October, the place was decorated for Halloween. And in December, there was a great big Christmas tree on the platform. We couldn't move it. And now this was in Canada, and portraits of the King and Queen of England, as well as the British flag, were permanent fixtures in the hall. You couldn't remove any of it for the meeting. Yet, to their credit, many interested persons attended our meetings, and to them, it wasn't the meeting place that was important, it was what they were learning there that counted.
When he said that part about the King and Queen of England, my initial reaction was, are you some kind of vampire? How can you be that old? The King and Queen of England, the Queen of England, has reigned since, I researched this, February 6th, 1952. So, is he really that old? It turns out he is. Because if you go on Google and type in David Splane born, it doesn't give you the day and month, but it does give you the year 1944. So if David Splane was born in 1944, it makes him 77 years old. And it means that in 1952, when Queen Elizabeth began her reign, he was 7 or 8 years old. So he is just about old enough to be able to say, oh, we had pictures of the King and Queen of England at our rented facility, even though it's kind of dubious as to how much he can call himself or refer to himself as a witness at such a young age. I'll let you be the deliberator there, audience. But in any case, let's remember what this talk is about. It's about organizational refinements. David Splane is arguing that because of a scripture in Isaiah, we should expect to see the organization getting better and better and better. Exhibit A, we now have kingdom halls, whereas many congregations used to meet in rented facilities and there were drawbacks. And in fact, here is his conclusion a little bit later on to that effect.
Nowadays, our Kingdom Hall construction is supervised by the LDCs with lots of qualified volunteers, and practical Kingdom Halls can be constructed in a short period of time.
I mean, maybe viewers will be impressed with that. We now have Kingdom Halls. Therefore, we are God's one and only true organization because look how things are improving. I would suggest it's inevitable that this sort of thing is going to happen when a religion grows. So just because a religion grows to the point where it both needs and has extra real estate, that alone isn't an argument for divine backing. And if you're going to make that argument, you then need to explain why all other religions that have their own places of worship, whereas they once used to meet in less desirable surroundings, how it can be that they also have this same refinement. And just a small point on this whole rented facilities thing. I can't help but notice there will be many congregations watching this who are still in rented facilities. I can remember when I was a Jehovah's Witness, the next congregation along, I was in Wilmslow, in Knutsford congregation, which was our neighbouring congregation, they had their meetings in rented facilities. So this isn't so long ago. This isn't like the 40s and 50s only. Right up into the relatively recent period, there were congregations, and quite frankly, probably still are a lot of congregations, meeting in rented facilities. I even checked the Shepherd book. The Shepherd book in chapter 21 has a section, just one paragraph, albeit, has a section on rented facilities and what congregations should do if they need to meet in a rented facility. And spoiler alert, it's let the LDC know. But they're making provision for this right up into the 21st century. So is it truly a refinement if there are still many congregations, apparently, that are in this situation? And on this whole thing about flags and Halloween and Christmas, I can remember going to my last convention in 2010 in Croatia. I'd just moved to Croatia. And I can remember finding it odd that we were going to this basketball arena in Zagreb for our convention, and they had a Croatian flag hanging on the wall, kind of higher up towards the ceiling, but nevertheless it was behind the platform. And it felt odd to me that we were meeting for this banquet of spiritual food, and there was the Croatian flag. Again, David Splane is talking about all of this as though it's the distant past. But if even I have a recollection, a recent recollection of more or less what he's talking about, I can only imagine how many witnesses will be watching this month's broadcast, scratching their heads thinking, well, I can't wait until our congregation gets that refinement.
Until 1959, only brothers were enrolled in the school. For some years, during the first few minutes of the school, there was a roll call, and the names of all the brothers enrolled in the school were read out. Now, when your name was read out, you were to answer present. A few rebels would say here, but you were supposed to say present. Now, initially, according to the instructions, if anyone was deliberately and habitually absent over a period of time, he was dropped from the school. Later, that was discontinued. Now, the roll call arrangement got me into a bit of trouble. You see, in our congregation, when the roll was being called each week, I noticed that there were a few young brothers who were just a little bit older than I was who would answer present. So one night, after the school, I asked the school servant if I could have my name read out at the next meeting. He warmly commended me, and sure enough, I got my name read out the following week. Everyone congratulated me after the meeting. Couldn't understand why. I only said present. Problem was, I didn't know that when you got your name read out, you were agreeing to give a talk. I thought I was just signing up to have my name read out. Well, a couple of months later, on April the 8th, 1953, I delivered my first 8-minute talk on the theme, Proclaiming the World's Doom. Now, why an 8-minute talk? Well, we didn't have Bible readings yet, so when you were on the school, you were giving an 8-minute talk. Well, today, we make sure everyone understands what's involved in being a student in the midweek meeting.
Do we now? Okay. Well, thank you, David. This was fascinating. What David has just given us is a fascinating window into not just his life. He seems very anxious to tell us all about his life and make this all about him. But he's also given us an interesting window into his character. And frankly, into his arrogance. And I will explain why. First of all, look at the title of this guy's first ever talk. David Splane, governing body member, gets up on the platform as a 9-year-old. Remember, he was apparently born in 1944. So in 1953, he would have been around 9 years old. He gets up on the platform as a 9-year-old in 1953 and gives a talk that literally has the word doom in the title.
Well, a couple of months later, on April the 8th, 1953, I delivered my first 8-minute talk on the theme, Proclaiming the World's Doom.
So this guy has been proclaiming doom for 68 years. Wow. I absolutely love that. And there's no irony or shame there, is there? I got up and my first talk was all about the good news and how to develop Christian values and how to show love for your fellow man. No, my first talk was about proclaiming doom. And as a bonus, we get to hear all about the circumstances surrounding his first proclamation of doom, his first talk. He tells us that he inadvertently got involved in the school because he wanted to hear his name read out.
Problem was, I didn't know that when you got your name read out, you were agreeing to give a talk. I thought I was just signing up to have my name read out.
I thought I was just signing up to have my name read out because I love having my name read out. 9-year-old David Splane, bless him. What a beautiful child he was. Maybe Tibor can overlay the picture. So there's 9-year-old David Splane. And even at that tender age, he loved to get a bit of prominence. He loved to hear his name being read out. He loved recognition. He loved prominence. Isn't it interesting how little has changed in 68 years? It was an omen of what was to come, because this guy still very much fancies himself and is besotted with his own prominence and with his own prestige and with putting himself out in front of others. And at 9 years old, he's proud of the fact that at 9 years old, he was standing on a platform lecturing adults about Christianity and about religion and about doom. And he's proud of that. But I'm not even warming up yet. Because what's most interesting about this whole story is the way he signs off on this particular refinement, this particular development. The whole reason, apparently, why he's embarked on this little cul-de-sac down memory lane is to make the point that things are done better now because Jehovah's Witnesses are better informed as to what's expected of them.
Well, today, we make sure everyone understands what's involved in being a student in the midweek meeting.
Yes, everyone today knows what's involved. Back then, people were clueless. Poor little David Splane, poor little David H. Splane, who wanted to have his name read out, he was misled by the people in his congregation. They should have informed him. I'm David Splane. Why would you not have informed 9-year-old me that it wasn't just about having your name read out, which is an easy mistake to make? I just assumed it was a name reading ritual, and I wanted my name to be included in the name reading ritual. I didn't know, because there were no regulations. There were no guidelines on this, so I was clueless. I, David Splane, 9-year-old David Splane, should have been better informed. I should have been better informed. Thankfully, nowadays, Jehovah's Witnesses are better informed. It feels almost like he's having a pop at his elders who are long dead. He's having a pop at either his elders or early leaders of the organization for not fully briefing him when he was 9 years old as to what was expected. There's just one small problem. Even in his story, he has alluded to the fact that there were instructions.
Now, initially, according to the instructions, if anyone was deliberately and habitually absent over a period of time, he was dropped from the school.
According to the instructions. So there were instructions. I wonder what these said. I wonder if they included any information that might have been helpful to little David, little 9-year-old David, who wanted to have his name read out. It turns out there were instructions. There was a massive book of them. And here they are. Theocratic Aid to Kingdom Publishers. This was published in 1945, and bear in mind we're talking about events in 1953. So this is almost certainly the book they would have been using. This is a forerunner, by the way, to the Theocratic Ministry School book. Can it show up on camera properly? There we go. So this is the book that I remember when I was on the Theocratic Ministry School. This was published in the 1970s, and it was the forerunner to the book I showed you earlier in this rebuttal, which is now the Benefit book. But all the way back when David Splane was giving his first talk about doom, this was the relevant guidance. And if we turn to page 12, allow me to read a pertinent paragraph, which maybe Tibor will show. Enrollment. Oh, any brother, young or old, in the company or unit who will show appreciation for the course by attending regularly and studying diligently the outlined material, and who will participate in the speaking assignments, may enroll. Roll will be called at the beginning of each study meeting, that a record of attendance may be kept. Any who voluntarily and continually fail to attend will be dropped from the enrollment. Each one enrolled will be held responsible for presenting before the class the student talks that may be assigned. It seems to me like they were giving clear instructions. It seems to me like they were making sure everyone understands what's involved in being a student in the midweek meeting.
Well, today, we make sure everyone understands what's involved in being a student in the midweek meeting.
That, for me, is a really telling clue into this guy's character, this guy's personality. It's already no surprise to me that David Splane wanted to hear his name read out when he was little. That's no surprise at all. I find it funny that his first talk was about doom. But that little dig at the end there, oh, if I'd have been in charge of this organisation back then, I would have made sure everyone had the proper instructions, because 9-year-old David Splane would not have made that mistake if it had been properly explained to him. That seems to be his attitude. And again, he's having a dig at people who are now dead and who can't answer back. There's just one problem. The literature remains, and we can see what the guidelines were back then. And there was guidance on it. He just ignored it, or hadn't bothered to read what he was getting enrolled in, which speaks volumes about him, but isn't really a criticism of the organisation back then, or isn't really an example of how the organisation has since been refined. There were instructions back then, and there are instructions now. So what? What does this tell us about this being an organisation that's being continually refined by God? If anything, what this story does tell us is, number one, it tells us that David Splane is a self-obsessed, self-indulgent egomaniac who loves to have his name read out and has loved to have his name given prominence ever since he was a 9-year-old. And second of all, It's given us a window into his arrogance. He is criticizing people who are dead, who cannot speak for themselves, and he is shaming them for not giving him the information he needed as a 9-year-old, even though the information was plainly available to him.